Then you go on to say, not only is IQ not all-encompassing to begin with, but it would be absurd to base my interactions based on the preconceived notion of IQ. First of all, I never said IQ is all-encompassing. IQ is an imperfect metric of, well, of G, right? And I probably shouldn't even have said that, but an IQ test is an imperfect metric, okay? And the importance of an IQ test has a lot to do with its predictive validity. What does an IQ test mean in terms of performance in some sort of job? All right, and I have a video entitled IQ Will Put You in Your Place. No, IQ won't really put you in your place. That title is just kind of tongue-in-cheek to get people to look at it, but what I say in that video is what IQ measures, what it doesn't measure, and that's it. I never said IQ is all-encompassing, but when you deal with large groups, okay, you deal with something. When you deal with larger and larger populations, they start to conform to mathematical models. Like when you deal with larger and larger populations, the populations start to conform to mathematical models. And this is why I say, and I've said a few times, maybe not in the video that I'm linking to, but I've said in a few times that I don't think it's important for an individual to know his IQ. Right? I don't think it's important for an individual to know its IQ because there's so much variation, not only within the IQ score of an individual, but variation in the validity of a person's IQ score. So there's variation within a person's IQ score, but there's also variation within the validity of that IQ score. So which leads to the next point, that it would be absurd to base your interactions on a person with a preconceived notion of their IQ. Even if you knew their IQ, it wouldn't be important because you don't even know how much their IQ means to them, right? There's a lot of people with low IQs who function brilliantly, and a lot of people with high IQs who are, retarded. So I never said you should base your interactions on people with a preconceived notion of IQ. I never said that. I don't do that, right? I don't do that in real life, and I guess from what you see, do I do that here on YouTube? Do I, not interact with people because they're black or something? No, I don't. All right, and I never said that you should, and I don't know why you're bringing this up. I don't know why you're saying that I said you shouldn't interact with people based on a preconceived notion of IQ, which is kind of a veiled way of saying based on their race. All right, I never said that, and I don't know why you're saying this. All right, and it's incredibly abusive, Alex. It's very abusive. It's not a position I hold. It's not a position I ever wanted to hold. All right, and so, I mean, even people who want to go off and form Raceland don't have this belief that you should not interact with someone based on their race. I mean, it's just a silly position that like nobody holds. Not even like the racists hold this position. Okay. Anyway, on to voluntary homogeneous community. Alex, when you have a homogeneous community, what you're going to have is you're going to have a comparative disadvantage of labor, and the homogeneous community will sustain itself to the extent that they're willing to put up with the comparative disadvantage of labor, right? And so they're basically paying to be homogeneous, right? There's a cost to homogeneity. You're depriving yourself of either cheap labor or high-tech labor, depending on what your labor force is like, right? And so there's a cost of homogeneity, and it will be sustained to the extent that people are willing to pay that cost. And then you said something like, well, but what you have is you have different. Like one guy may say, well, it's not worth it for me to not hire Mexicans in Whitelandia, so I'm going to go ahead and hire a Mexican. How will the homogeneity of Whitelandia be maintained if there's just one guy who? How will the homogeneity of Whitelandia be maintained if there's a minority of white people who want to bring in Mexicans to work for them? Well, the homogeneity of it will be maintained in the same way any negatively enforced organization will be maintained. It'll be maintained as like, okay, well, if you bring in Mexicans, then we'll cut off your power or something like that. But the thing is, if like, for example, say the power company says, no, I don't want to cut off power. Like the power company says, he's going to bring in Mexicans, and no, I'm not going to agree with the Whitelandia court ruling, and I'm not going to cut off power. Then what you're going to see there is you're going to see the disintegration of Whitelandia, and it's no longer going to be homogenous. And I've said this. I said that I do not believe that a voluntarily homogeneous region can be maintained. I don't believe it can be maintained. And then he said something like, well, then the only way that the homogeneity of Whitelandia could be maintained is through coercion. But the problem with that, Alex, is you're assuming that a state can emerge within anarchy. You're saying, because what you're saying is that this voluntarily homogeneous organization will have to be enforced coercively. But that assumes that it can be enforced coercively. All right? But it can't be enforced coercively because new states cannot emerge within anarchy. And I'm going to post a little video entitled Shelling Points where I say states cannot emerge within anarchy. And because of that, I believe that eventually a voluntary association of white people will eventually break down and eventually integrate. But, if white nationalists believe otherwise, if white nationalists say, no, I believe that we'll be able to sustain it, well, then they can, they can try. They can go knock themselves out and try, and I have no problem with them trying it. And if they try it and it starts to fail, and then they say, okay, well, this is failing, so we need to enforce the rules coercively. Once they start trying to enforce the rules coercively, they're going to get guerrilla wars, and they're going to lose. All right? See my video, Shelling Points. It does not work. States require consent. States require belief. Okay? So, anyway. This is really slanderous, Alex. This is really slanderous. Or libelous, I don't know which one it is. But this is really uncalled for, what you're doing here.